The stars stretched out before Captain Elara Donovan. As she stood at the bridge of the Phoenix, staring into the vast emptiness of space, the hum of the ship's engines was steady and reassuring, but beneath it, there was a quiet tension, a palpable weight that hung over the crew. Humanity was losing the war. Their enemies outnumbered them, outgunned them, and had more resources at their disposal. Every battle had been a struggle for survival, each one more desperate than the last. But Elara refused to give up. Humanity had survived worse. And this time, it wouldn't be different. She turned away from the viewscreen, her eyes locking onto the holotable, where a map of the galaxy flickered before her, showing the remnants of human territory scattered like embers across a cold, dark void. The once mighty Starfire Empire had fallen centuries ago, but its legacy still lived on in the hearts of those who refused to let humanity fade into obscurity. Even now, after all the defeats, the betrayal, the hardships, the human spirit refused to be crushed. The artifact was their last hope, a beacon that might hold the key to turning the tide of the war, a key that could unlock something far greater than anyone could imagine. It had been discovered on a small world on the edge of the known galaxy, an ancient relic buried beneath the surface for millennia. The information had come in a message from a scout ship, one of the few that still roamed the galaxy looking for signs of hope. The message was simple and urgent, a discovery like no other, a weapon of unimaginable power, hidden on a forgotten planet. Elara had sent a fleet to retrieve it, but even before they arrived, the enemy had taken notice. Their spies had already caught wind of the artifact's existence, and now every alien empire worth its salt was looking for it too. Elara's fleet had made it to the planet first, but the battle had been fierce. They had fought tooth and nail for every inch of ground as they secured the artifact from the ruins of an ancient civilization, a civilization long lost to time. The moment the artifact was recovered, Elara had known it was something different. It hummed with energy, a strange metallic glow that seemed to pulse with life itself. When her engineers began analyzing it, they found it contained knowledge far beyond anything humanity had ever known. The technology encoded within was both terrifying and wondrous. But it was the strange energy readings that had them all perplexed, something ancient and far beyond the scope of the current war. It was more than just a weapon, it was a key. But to what Elara didn't know yet, as she stood in front of the console where the artifact was being carefully analyzed, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The artifact held secrets that could turn the tide of the war, but it also held dangers they couldn't begin to understand. The moment she activated the artifact in the lab, strange things began happening. The ship's power flickered before surging in a burst of light. For a split second, the entire ship was bathed in an eerie glow, and then just as quickly the power was restored, but the strange hum remained, a whispering presence that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. As she turned back to the viewscreen, she saw a distant glint in the void of space, an approaching enemy fleet. It had begun. The hunt for the artifact was on. The tension on the bridge was palpable as Elara's hands gripped the armrests of her command chair, her mind racing through 100 possible outcomes. She had no doubt that the enemy fleets were already converging on their location. The artifact was too valuable, too dangerous to be left in human hands, and every alien empire would do whatever it took to claim it. She turned to her communications officer, Lieutenant Jace Holloway. His face was tense as he scanned the incoming data. Elara asked for a status update. Holloway's voice was low but urgent. Captain, we have 3 enemy fleets closing in on our position. The closest one is a Torgoth warship group. They'll be here in less than 2 hours. What's the status of our own forces? Elara responded grimly. The Phoenix was heavily outnumbered, and she knew the Nova and Valor ships weren't enough to defend the artifact much longer. We can hold off the first wave, but we'll need reinforcements if we're going to escape with the artifact intact. The fleet is on high alert, but they're scattered across the sector, so reinforcements are far off. Holloway's words were clear. The situation was bleak. Their only chance now was to buy enough time for the artifact to be fully analyzed and understand what they were dealing with. Elara turned to her chief engineer, Darnell Sykes. who was working tirelessly with the artifact's data. A hologram of swirling symbols and unknown diagrams floated before her. Naomi's face was pale, her brow furrowed with confusion. "It's like nothing we've ever seen, Captain," she said, her voice filled with awe and something darker. "This artifact, it's not just technology, it's alive. It's reacting to our ship, it's responding to the ship's energy systems. I think it's trying to communicate with us." Ilara's heart raced alive. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Naomi didn't look up from the hologram, her fingers dancing over the controls. "It's like it's aware of us. Somehow it's tapping into the ship's power. It's changing things inside the reactor. We've seen some strange energy fluctuations, but nothing we can explain." Ilara stood still for a moment, her thoughts racing. Was this artifact merely a weapon, or something more? Could it be that their ancestors had created something far more advanced than anyone had ever realized, an ancient intelligence, a key to something beyond the galaxy? Naomi's voice broke through her thoughts. "Captain, if we don't figure out how to control this, we could lose the entire ship," she said in a strained voice. "It's too dangerous to leave unchecked. We might not survive long enough to learn its secrets." Ilara nodded grimly. She understood the risk. They couldn't afford to wait for reinforcements, but they also couldn't afford to lose control of the artifact. She looked out the viewscreen again. The enemy was getting closer. They had no time left. They had to make a choice: now fight to protect the artifact, or flee and risk the galaxy descending into chaos. A voice cut through the silence. On the bridge, Ensign Tarek, who had been tracking the incoming fleet, spoke up. "Captain, the Torgoth warships are sending us a transmission. It's not a standard comm signal. They're trying to establish contact." Ilara's stomach tightened as she thought about the implications. The Torgoth were ruthless and calculating. If they were reaching out, it meant they were preparing for something more than just a fight. "Holloway, what's the message?" He looked at the screen before him, and his face turned pale. "They're demanding we surrender the artifact, Captain. They're offering us a safe passage out of the system. If we comply." Ilara clenched her jaw. "No negotiation, no surrender," she said firmly. "Prepare for battle." The hum of the ship's engines became a deafening roar as Ilara gripped the command chair with both hands, her eyes fixed on the viewscreen. The enemy fleets were nearly upon them. The Torgoth warships were massive and menacing, their dark hulls reflecting the cold light of distant stars. They had been part of the galaxy's terror for centuries, and their reputation alone was enough to strike fear into anyone who stood against them. Ilara didn't flinch. Her jaw was set in determination. The Phoenix would not back down. The ship rocked violently as the first salvo from the Torgoth warships struck their shields. The crew was thrown off balance, but they quickly regained their footing. Ilara barked orders without hesitation. Evasive maneuvers. "Now fire at their lead ship. I want to hit them hard before they get too close." Holloway quickly adjusted course, and the Phoenix lurched forward. The weapon systems lit up with fire as plasma rounds and ion pulses shot across the void, each blast striking the Torgoth warship. But they barely made a dent. The Torgoth were relentless, and their ships were built for war. Every hit was absorbed with little more than a flicker of light from their shields. The second wave of Torgoth ships closed in as Ilara's crew fought to hold them back. She could feel the pressure mounting. Their resources were limited. Their energy reserves were being drained faster than they could recharge. Every shot from the enemy was more punishing than the last. Their chances of survival were dwindling. She knew it, but she wouldn't give up. Not now, not when they were so close to victory. Ilara's mind raced through their options, but every plan she thought of came with its own risks. They couldn't hold off these warships forever. She turned to her tactical officer, Lieutenant Zane Cole, who was monitoring the battle with sharp focus. "How long until we can access the artifact's power again?" she asked. His fingers flew over the controls, and he spoke quickly. "We're nearly there, Captain. It's responding to our systems. We should be able to tap into its energy soon. But we have to get the ship closer to it." Zane's voice was tight with strain. Ilara glanced at the viewscreen again. The Torgoth were closing in fast. They were determined to take the Phoenix down, and they were about to succeed if Ilara didn't act soon. She turned back to Zane. "Do it now. Use the artifact's power." Now he nodded and activated the controls. Immediately, the ship jolted as an unfamiliar energy pulsed through its systems. The crew was thrown off balance as the ship's shields flared to life with a new intensity. The artifact's energy surged into the Phoenix's reactors like a bolt of lightning feeding the ship with a power it had never experienced before. The Torgoth warships paused for a brief moment. As their sensors detected the sudden surge of energy, Ilara's eyes widened. As she watched the Phoenix's energy output increase beyond anything she had expected, their weapon systems fired with a force that sent shockwaves through the Torgoth fleet. Ilara didn't hesitate. She gave the order to fire again. And again the Torgoth ships took heavy damage, their shields buckling under the unprecedented force. Ilara could see the fear in their eyes now. They weren't the predators anymore. They were the prey. The Phoenix was no longer just another ship. It was a force of nature, and Ilara could feel its power coursing through her. The Phoenix wasn't just a warship now. It was something more, something ancient, something human. The Torgoth began to retreat, their ships staggering under the relentless fire. But just as they did, Ilara's comms officer, Lieutenant Holloway, spoke urgently. "Captain, there's a new fleet incoming. It's the Karish Dominion. They've joined the fight." Ilara's blood ran cold as she saw the massive insectoid ships emerge from the shadows, their sleek forms almost gliding through space. They were terrifying in their own right. And now they were in the fight too. The odds had just gotten worse, and Ilara knew they couldn't afford another battle. Not like this. She glanced back at the artifact, the key to humanity's survival, but also its greatest danger. They had no choice, they had to fight. But this time they would need more than just firepower to win. The bridge of the Phoenix was a storm of activity, alarms blaring as the Karish Dominion fleet emerged from the darkness, their insectoid ships looming like shadows, stretching across the void. Ilara's pulse quickened as she assessed the situation. The Torgoth warships had retreated, but the arrival of the Karish changed everything. The odds were no longer just against them. They were impossible. Holloway's voice cut through the tension. "Captain, the Karish fleet is moving into formation. They're positioning themselves for an attack. Their weapons are charging." Ilara's mind raced. She knew the Karish Dominion was not like the Torgoth. Their ships were agile, their weapons more precise, and their tactics far more intelligent. They were a well-coordinated enemy, a force to be reckoned with. The Phoenix was strong, but it wasn't invincible. Ilara could see the vast numbers of Karish ships spreading out across the system on her tactical screen, each one a calculated threat. She turned to her tactical officer, Lieutenant Zane Cole, and gave the command, "Adjust course. Bring us about. We need to draw them into the asteroid belt. It's our only chance to use the environment to our advantage." Zane nodded without hesitation as he quickly input commands, his fingers flying over the controls. The Phoenix veered sharply towards the asteroid field, a dense cluster of debris and rocky formations that could provide some cover against the Karish fleet. The ship shook as it turned, but Ilara held firm, not giving an inch. She wasn't going to let humanity fall today. Not when they were so close. The Karish ships followed in formation, relentless, as always, their sharp angles and organic designs making them look like predators, hunting their prey. Ilara's fingers dug into the armrest of her chair. As the Phoenix darted between asteroids, she could feel the weight of the battle pressing down on her. Their shields were holding, but only just. She knew they wouldn't last forever, and they had to buy enough time to escape with the artifact. The alien ships were getting closer, and soon they would be in range of their weapons. Ilara could feel the sweat on her brow as the seconds stretched into eternity, her breath steady but quick. The asteroid field was their only chance to slow the Karish. But it was a risky maneuver. If they didn't time it perfectly, they'd be destroyed. In the tight quarters, she glanced at Naomi, the chief engineer, who was staring at the systems, her expression tense. "Naomi, the artifact," Ilara asked in a low voice. "We need more power. Can we use it again?" Naomi hesitated for a moment before replying. "Captain, it's volatile. If we push it too far, we could overload the entire ship. I can't guarantee we'll survive, but it could give us the energy we need." Ilara's mind raced as she considered the consequences. But there was no choice. They couldn't run, and they couldn't fight without it. The Karish were too strong. They had to win, and they had to do it fast. "We do it, Naomi, do it now," Ilara commanded. Naomi nodded and began tapping commands into the console. Within moments, the Phoenix surged with energy, the artifact pulsing once again, its strange energy coursing through the ship's systems, amplifying everything. Ilara could feel it in the air, a hum of power that seemed to vibrate in her bones. The shields grew brighter, the weapons charged faster, and the Phoenix seemed to move with an agility it never had before. Elara gripped the armrest as the ship dove between two massive asteroids, narrowly avoiding a collision with one of the Karish ships that had tried to follow too closely. The sudden maneuver left the Karish fleet in a disarray, their weapons missing their target as Elara took advantage of the opening fire. "Everything we have, Zane," she ordered, and the ship's cannons erupted with an intensity that sent shockwaves through space. The first Karish ship was struck by a full barrage, the plasma rounds disintegrating its outer armor. In a single hit, the ship shuddered as it tore through the Karish lines. Elara's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't let up now. There was no room for mistakes. Another ship was already closing and firing its weapons as the Phoenix sped toward another asteroid. Elara twisted the command wheel, her mind focused completely on the battle. Before her, the fate of humanity rested on the next few minutes. The asteroid field was their final refuge and their deadliest weapon, as they used it to outmaneuver the relentless pursuit of the Karish Dominion. The Phoenix flew through the asteroid field with precision and speed. The hum of the ship's engines was louder now as the artifact's power surged through the ship. Each maneuver became more fluid, as if the Phoenix itself had become a part of Elara's will. The Karish were struggling to keep up, but they were relentless, their insectoid ships darting between the asteroids, their weapons firing in rapid bursts. Elara could see the chaos unfold on her tactical display. The Karish were starting to realize they were being outmaneuvered. They were adjusting their formation, trying to trap the Phoenix in the narrowest parts of the field where there would be no escape. But Elara wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. She gripped the armrests of her chair as her eyes darted from the view screen to the holographic map. In front of her, the enemy was closing in. They had limited time to escape the asteroid field before the Karish adjusted and cut off their only exit. "Zane," she said, her voice firm, "I need a distraction now. Make them think we're going one way, and then pull a hard turn right." He nodded and started inputting commands with practiced speed. Elara could feel the ship shift as the Phoenix swerved one way and then sharply banked in the opposite direction. The Karish followed, their weapons fired too early, their shots skimming past the Phoenix as it sped away towards a new opening. The Phoenix was a blur in the asteroid field, the Karish struggling to adjust their aim. But Elara knew this advantage wouldn't last much longer. The ship's shields were beginning to flicker under the strain. The sudden maneuvers were taxing the systems, and she knew if they didn't escape soon, the ship would be in danger of catastrophic failure. "We need to break through now," Elara said, her voice cutting through the tension. Zane checked his console, and his eyes flicked up to meet hers. "Captain, we're nearly there. There's an opening up ahead. But we have to move fast if we want to clear the field," he said, his voice sharp with urgency. Elara didn't hesitate for a second. She gave the command to push forward. The Phoenix surged ahead, dodging a final barrage of Karish fire. The asteroid field was thinning out ahead of them, and Elara knew the moment they broke through, the Karish would be on their tail again. But it was their only chance. The Phoenix shot forward like a bullet, rocketing through the last stretch of asteroids. Elara's heart pounded in her chest, the feeling of adrenaline coursing through her veins. She gritted her teeth and willed the ship to move faster. The opening was close now, so close she could almost taste it. Just a little further, they would break through. They would survive. Holloway's voice came through the comms. "Captain, incoming transmission from the Torgoth fleet." Elara's stomach dropped. They couldn't be serious. She thought they'd barely survived the first wave. Now they were being targeted by the Karish, and the Torgoth wanted to speak to them. But she knew better than to waste time on negotiation. Whatever message they'd wanted to send could wait. She responded sharply, "Ignored Holloway, and get us through this opening now." But just as she said the words, the Phoenix lurched forward. The ship's sensors screamed as something enormous blotted out the stars ahead of them. Elara's eyes widened in disbelief. A massive Torgoth dreadnought had emerged from the shadows. It was too large to miss. Its shadows stretched over them like a living mountain, blocking their only escape path. Elara's pulse raced as the Torgoth ship began charging its weapons. They were trapped. The Phoenix was surrounded. The Karish were closing in from behind, and the Torgoth dreadnought was readying to fire. They had no way out, no way to fight against two massive fleets closing in on them. The artifact's power hummed beneath her feet. She could feel it vibrating with energy. It was their last hope, but Elara didn't know if it would be enough. The Phoenix was exhausted. The crew was exhausted. But as she looked out at the vastness of space, her mind didn't falter. She refused to give up. She'd fight until the very end. We're not finished. Yet, she said, her voice steady despite the crushing weight of their situation. She turned to the crew, her family now, and spoke one word: full speed ahead. Ilara's heart pounded as the Torgoth dreadnought loomed ahead, its massive bulk blocking any chance of escape. The Phoenix was cornered. The Karish Dominion fleet was closing in from behind their insectoid ships, moving with swift precision. Ilara's mind raced. There had to be a way out of this, a way to survive. She looked to her crew, their faces grim but determined. The artifact hummed beneath their feet, its energy pulsing in the ship like a second heartbeat. It was their only chance. She had no time to waste. The dreadnought's weapons were charging, ready to obliterate them in seconds if they didn't act fast. Ilara took a deep breath and made her decision. Full speed ahead, she ordered again, her voice unwavering. The crew reacted instantly. Zane was already adjusting the ship's trajectory, pushing the Phoenix to its limits. The ship surged forward toward the massive Torgoth dreadnought, its enormous form blocking the stars ahead. They were going to ram it. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Ilara felt the ship shudder as it accelerated, the artifact's power coursing through their systems like fire in their veins. The ship was faster than it had ever been before. The Torgoth dreadnought loomed closer, its weapons charging, their deadly glow reflecting in the Phoenix's hulls. Zane shouted from his station, "We're almost there, Captain. The gap is closing. The Torgoth are locking onto us." Ilara nodded without a word, her eyes fixed ahead. She was determined they were going to break through no matter what. They'd faced impossible odds before. They would face them again. The Phoenix rocketed toward the dreadnought. Its guns opened fire with relentless precision, plasma shots striking the Phoenix's shields with brutal force. But the ship held its course. The dreadnought fired first, the massive energy beams streaking through space toward them. Ilara's blood ran cold, but she didn't flinch. The Phoenix was still moving forward. "Zane, pull us up," Ilara shouted at the last moment. The ship responded, a sharp roll and a violent turn, sending them upwards toward the dreadnought's underbelly. The Torgoth's energy beams shot past them, missing by inches. The Phoenix was almost there. They were going to dive under the dreadnought's belly and tear through the lower section of its hull. At least that was the plan. But just as they were about to break through, a new sound filled the ship, the hum of the artifact shifting to a new frequency, a sharp crackle in the air. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. What was happening? A sudden pulse of energy shot through the ship, vibrating the entire hull. The lights flickered, and the entire crew staggered from the force of it. The dreadnought's fire paused, as if caught off guard, for just a fraction of a second. But it was enough. Zane punched in a new course change. Ilara's grip tightened on the armrest. The Phoenix was now on a direct path for the dreadnought's weakest point, the shield generators. They would break the dreadnought's defenses wide open, but the ship was shaking violently beneath them. The energy from the artifact was overwhelming, overloading the systems. Ilara could feel it in every fiber of her being. It was too much, too fast. Naomi shouted from her station, "Captain, the artifact's energy is destabilizing. The core is going critical. I can't stabilize it. We need to shut it down." Ilara's mind raced. She knew they couldn't stop now. They were so close. She looked to Zane again. "Keep us on course," she ordered. "We have to destroy the dreadnought now." He nodded, his face set in a hard grimace, as the ship shot through the final stretch of space toward the Torgoth flagship. They were a mere seconds away from impact. The artifact's energy surged once again, this time stronger than ever, its power coursing through every system of the Phoenix. Ilara could feel the pressure building. The ship groaned under the strain, but they couldn't stop it now. They were committed. They had no choice but to trust the artifact or die trying. The dreadnought's shield crackled as the Phoenix bore down on it, firing everything they had at its core, weapons blazing, and the ship's energy pouring into the assault with unstoppable force. Ilara closed her eyes for a moment, trusting the artifact and the ship beneath her to carry them through this final test. The Phoenix shuddered violently as it plowed toward the Torgoth dreadnought, the entire ship groaning under the strain of the artifact's raw power. Ilara's hands were locked on the command chair, her eyes wide with focus, as the ship shot through the final stretch of space. The dreadnought's shields were flickering. They were almost through, but the ship was pushing past its limits. Naomi shouted from her station, "Captain, we can't take much more of this. The core is nearly at critical. The artifact's energy is overloading the ship's reactors." Ilara didn't flinch. There was no time for hesitation. They were seconds away from impact. The Torgoth dreadnought loomed large in front of them, its weapons glowing bright with deadly energy. But Ilara had no intention of letting them fire again. She gritted her teeth as the Phoenix hurtled forward, every part of the ship screaming with the pressure. She could feel the artifact's energy humming through the air like a storm. Pushing them faster, the ship broke through the dreadnought's weakened shield. With a violent crackle, the sound of 100 impacts. At once the Phoenix plowed into the underbelly of the Torgoth flagship, the blast from their weapons tearing through the remaining hull plating. The ship bucked as explosions rocked the Phoenix's systems were failing all over. The bridge alarms blaring in the background. The ship was being torn apart from the inside out. But the dreadnought was finished. A massive explosion erupted from the Torgoth flagship's core, sending a shockwave through space. The Phoenix was thrown back as the enemy ship disintegrated in a blaze of fire and twisted metal. Ilara's vision blurred as the impact rattled the ship. The ship's lights flickered. The crew was thrown from their seats. The ship's core was rapidly destabilizing. The artifact's energy was running wild throughout the entire vessel. "We're losing power." Ilara's voice cut through the chaos, her thoughts racing. "We have to stabilize the core now," Zane shouted at the crew engineers on deck now. Naomi's voice was full of panic. "Captain, the artifact has triggered a chain reaction. We can't reverse it. It's going to tear the entire ship apart if we don't shut it down immediately." Ilara's heart raced. She knew the risk they were facing. The artifact's energy was too powerful to control, and the ship was already on the brink of destruction. She turned to Naomi. "Can we do anything to divert the energy? Can we use the artifact to stabilize the ship?" Naomi's face was pale, her hands moving rapidly over the console. "It's too unstable. We can't tap into its power any longer. It'll overload the ship." Ilara's mind raced. They couldn't survive like this. She had to think fast. Her eyes scanned the bridge. Her crew was exhausted, their faces haggard. But they were still fighting. She could feel it in her bones. They weren't going to give up now. Captain Holloway said urgently, "We're receiving a transmission. It's coming from outside the system." Ilara blinked. What kind of transmission? He didn't have to say it. She could already see the signs. The message was encrypted heavily, too heavily to ignore. She nodded grimly. "Open it." Holloway immediately complied. The screen in front of her flickered, and a new face appeared, an alien figure standing in front of a starry background, its features unfamiliar, its eyes gleaming with a cold intelligence. "Captain Ilara Donovan." The figure's voice was calm, its tone smooth. "We have been watching your progress," he said with a slight smile. "The artifact is a thing of great power, and it appears you have awakened it. We have much to discuss." Ilara's stomach dropped. "Who are you?" she demanded. The figure's smile deepened. "We are the Exoseraphs, and we are not your enemies, but you are standing on the precipice of something greater than you realize. Your actions have already shifted the course of the galaxy, and we will help you guide it." Ilara's mind spun, her hands gripping the chair tightly. The fate of humanity hung on this moment. She wasn't sure what to make of the Exoseraphs, but she didn't have time to consider the implications now. "Captain," she said, voice firm, "what do you want from us?" "We need your help to contain the artifact," the figure said. "The energy you've unlocked is too volatile for any civilization to control without guidance. But with the Exoseraph's knowledge, we can help you contain it, stabilize the core, and ensure the artifact is used to its fullest potential. If you're willing to trust us." Ilara didn't hesitate. She turned to Naomi. "Stabilize the core," she ordered without a second thought. Ilara's mind raced as she processed the words of the Exoseraph, the alien figure's cold voice reverberating in her ears. The ship was on the edge of collapse, and now she had to decide whether to trust these unknown beings. The fate of humanity was in her hands, and she didn't have the luxury of time. Naomi was already working at the console, her fingers flying over the systems in an attempt to stabilize the core. But the artifact's energy surged out of control again. The ship groaned under the pressure. Ilara turned to the view screen, seeing the wreckage of the Torgoth dreadnought slowly drifting apart in the distance. It was a moment of victory, but it felt hollow. The Phoenix was a wreck, barely holding together. She needed a solution, and she needed it fast. "Captain," the Exoseraph's voice cut through her thoughts, "we can help you, but the energy must be contained. We can show you how to harness its power safely." Ilara took a deep breath, fighting the panic rising in her chest. If the Exoseraphs could help them survive, then she had to take the risk. If they didn't, they were dead already. Unlistening, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. The figure nodded, and then spoke again. Do not trust the artifact's power fully. It is an ancient relic, but it was never meant for your species to wield without proper guidance. We can offer that guidance, but you must allow us to take control of the ship's systems temporarily. We will assist you, but only if you agree to our terms. Ilara's mind screamed at her to refuse, but her instincts told her this was the only option they had left. She turned to Naomi. The core was rapidly destabilizing, and she could feel the heat emanating from the walls. She knew Naomi's skills were unmatched, but this was beyond even her abilities. Naomi looked at Ilara, her face pale. We don't have a choice, Captain, she said softly. Ilara nodded tightly, and then spoke to the exoseraphs. Do it, she ordered. The figure on the screen smiled, and then began to speak in a language unfamiliar to Ilara. A strange hum filled the air around her, and she felt the ship respond. It was like the Phoenix was alive now, pulsing with the exoseraph's presence, its energy mixing with the artifacts. Ilara felt a twinge of unease, but the Phoenix didn't falter. The systems slowly began to stabilize, and the ship's power began to normalize. Naomi's eyes widened. As the core's pressure slowly started to decrease, she looked at Ilara and nodded in disbelief. The exoseraphs had done it. The ship was holding together. Ilara allowed herself a single breath of relief before the figure on the screen spoke again. Captain Donovan, we have assisted you, but we are not finished yet. The artifact's true purpose has only just begun. Ilara frowned. What do you mean? She asked, her voice low. The figure leaned forward slightly. Your species has unlocked something far more dangerous than you realize. The artifact is a key that opens doors to far greater powers than the ones you have seen. Ilara's blood ran cold. What kind of power do you mean? She demanded. The exoseraph's eyes gleamed with something unreadable. This galaxy is filled with ancient secrets, Captain Donovan, but some secrets are not meant to be discovered in your time. The artifact was meant to be a tool for a great reckoning. The figure paused, and then continued. There are forces in the galaxy who would stop at nothing to claim its power, and you have already drawn their attention. Ilara's stomach tightened. What do you want from us? She asked, her voice harsh. The exoseraphs did not respond immediately. Instead, they remained silent for several long moments before the figure spoke again. We offer you a choice, Captain Donovan. You may join us and become a part of something much greater, or you may continue down your current path and face the consequences. But be warned, the artifact is only the beginning of the challenges you will face. Ilara stared at the screen, her mind spinning. She had no idea who these beings were or what they truly wanted, but one thing was clear: their involvement had just made the stakes much higher. She turned to her crew, her family, her heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. We don't have a choice, she said softly. We have to fight whatever it is they want us to fight. Ilara felt the weight of the exoseraph's words settle over her like a heavy fog. The artifact was more than just a powerful relic. It was a key that could open doors to unknown dangers and untold power forces greater than anything humanity had faced before. Ilara turned her attention back to the ship's systems. Naomi had managed to stabilize the core, but the ship's damage was extensive. Alarms still rang across the bridge, and several systems were offline. The crew was exhausted, their faces worn from the constant strain of battle. Ilara knew they couldn't afford to rest for long. The Karish were still out there, and the Tolgoth hadn't been fully defeated yet. But now the stakes had shifted. The exoseraphs had made it clear that something far more dangerous was at play, something they hadn't even begun to comprehend. Captain Holloway's voice interrupted her thoughts. Captain, we've received new intel from the Karish fleet. They're reorganizing and preparing for another assault. Their commanders are communicating something about an unknown entity targeting our location. Ilara's mind raced. She glanced at Naomi, who was still working feverishly at her station. What does that mean? She asked. Holloway didn't have an answer, just that the Karish were no longer acting like they had before. They seemed almost cautious in their movements, like they were waiting for something else, something bigger. Ilara knew she didn't have time to dwell on the Karish, but she also couldn't ignore them. They were the immediate threat. Her eyes flicked to the viewscreen, and her thoughts turned to the exoseraphs. What were they really after? They had helped them, but it was clear they wanted something in return. The feeling of unease in her chest tightened, but she pushed it aside. For now, they had to survive this fight First she turned back to Zane. Get us into position. We need to make sure the Karish don't catch us off guard again, she said, her voice firm. The ship shook again, this time, not from the battle, but from a new disturbance. The air on the bridge seemed to hum with energy, as the artifact pulsed once more, its presence overwhelming. As if it had a life of its own, Ilara looked down at her console. The readings were off. The artifact's energy levels were fluctuating again. The Phoenix wasn't stable. She could feel it. Something was wrong. But she didn't know what. The exoseraphs had helped them contain the power. But there was something more to this artifact, something deeper, a force that neither she nor her crew fully understood. Naomi looked up from her station. Captain, the artifact is unstable again. I'm trying to compensate for the fluctuations, but it's getting worse. The energy is fluctuating between different frequencies. It's like it's trying to connect with something. Ilara's stomach dropped. She turned to the view screen, and then to Naomi. Can we block it? She asked. Naomi hesitated a moment before responding. Captain, if we can't stop it, we might lose control of the Phoenix completely. The artifact could take over the ship's systems if it fully connects with whatever it's trying to reach. Ilara's blood ran cold. She knew they had to stop it. They had to stop whatever the artifact was trying to do. But how? How could they stop something they didn't understand? As the minutes ticked by, the pressure mounted. The Karish fleet was getting closer, and the Phoenix was becoming more volatile with each passing second. She turned back to the exoseraphs on the view screen. What are you doing? She demanded. What is this artifact really capable of? The exoseraph smiled, but it wasn't reassuring. Captain Donovan, you have unlocked the first part of the artifact's purpose. But there is more than you can imagine. This power is not meant to be controlled by your species. But we have seen your potential. We believe you are capable of understanding it. If you are willing to accept our guidance. The figure's words sent a chill down Ilara's spine. We've already accepted your help, Ilara said through gritted teeth. But it's not enough. You told us we're not ready to handle it yet. And I'm asking you again, what is this artifact really capable of? The exoseraph's smile faltered for a moment before he spoke again. The artifact is a map, a guide to the source of unimaginable power hidden deep in the galaxy, a power that could either elevate your species beyond your wildest dreams or destroy everything you know. Ilara felt her breath catch. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about something far larger, something that could shape the future of the entire galaxy and beyond. Ilara's mind raced as the exoseraph's words echoed in her mind. The artifact was a map to something greater, something that could change the entire course of the galaxy. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a key to untold power, a power that could either uplift humanity or tear it apart. Captain Holloway's voice broke through the tension. Captain, the Karish are almost in firing range. Ilara snapped back to the present. The ship was falling apart around her. The core was still unstable, the artifact pulsing like a living thing in the heart of the Phoenix. Naomi's fingers were flying over the console, but the fluctuations were getting worse. There was no way to stop it without risking the ship completely. We can't hold them off much longer, she said breathlessly. We can't control the artifact much longer either. Ilara stood up, her eyes fixed on the view screen, where the Karish fleet was moving closer, their ships gleaming in the void. She turned to Zane. Get us out of here, she said, her voice firm. Zane's eyes widened. Captain, the ship's not stable enough for a jump. We can't risk it. Ilara didn't hesitate. She knew they had no other choice. The Karish were too close, and if they didn't act now, they'd be caught in a fight. They couldn't win. If we don't jump now, we're dead, Ilara said coldly. Do it now. Zane grimaced, but he input the command. The ship shuddered again. The artifact's energy flared once more. This time, a burst of blinding light shot out from the core of the Phoenix. The ship lurched forward as the FTL engines powered up the distortion of space around them, twisting. Ilara's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she was certain they would be torn apart. But then the light dimmed, and the ship was gone. They had jumped. The entire bridge was silent except for the hum of the ship's systems and the occasional alarm warning them of critical damage. Ilara closed her eyes, letting out a slow breath. They were alive, they had survived, but they were far from safe. Where are we? Zane asked, his voice shaking as he checked the coordinates. His screen flickered. Captain, we're far out on the edge of the known galaxy. I'm reading unfamiliar signals around us. It looks like we're near a massive structure. Ilara's eyes narrowed. A massive structure. She repeated the words aloud. Naomi looked up. Captain, the artifact's energy is stabilizing, but it's still trying to connect with something out there. I think it's reacting to whatever is near us, she frowned. They were no longer on the run from the Karish or the Torgoth. They were in uncharted space, and the artifact had brought them here. It was pulling them towards something ancient and powerful. What is it? Ilara whispered aloud. But she already knew they would have to find out for themselves. The Exo-Seraphs had warned her that they were only at the beginning of something much larger. But this was beyond anything she could have imagined. She turned to her crew, the faces of the people she had fought beside all this time. They were shaken, but resolute. Captain Holloway spoke up. Whatever this place is, it's not an accident. The Karish were waiting for something. They said it was an unknown entity that was targeting us. What if that entity is what's here? Ilara's heart skipped a beat. The unknown entity. The Karish had mentioned the Exo-Seraphs, hadn't warned her about that. A new danger, a new force waiting just beyond the stars. She turned back to the view screen and the massive structure ahead. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Its spires reaching up into the darkness, like the remnants of a forgotten civilization. Ilara knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a random encounter. This was the beginning of something much larger, something that would challenge everything they had known. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach. The galaxy was about to change, and they were in the heart of it now. They had no choice but to face whatever was waiting for them. Ilara sat back in her chair, her hands clenched tightly on the armrests. This fight wasn't over. It was only beginning.